I wanted to start by saying thank you to GIE, PCT, Dan, Brad, the entire team, and especially as well, certainly the sponsors, Arrow, Massey, Rollins, Terminex, and Rentokil. Hopefully this conference helps a lot of people in the industry that are thinking about selling their business and gives them a lot of good information. So with that said, I'll get started. I want to start with something that's been in the news quite a bit lately. Certainly the last couple weeks, maybe a little complicated. Try to simplify it and get through it kind of quick, but we've had a lot of calls saying, when should I sell? Is now the time? Are multiples staying strong? What's going on in the economy? Is the economy softening up? If the economy softens, what happens to the sale of my business? Will my business be worth more or less? How does this impact me? And then people are saying, hey, I'm hearing about this inverted yield curve. What does this mean? Is a recession coming? I'll start by saying I'm certainly not an economist, but if we look at the inverted yield curve, effectively what that says is that an inverted yield curve, as a rule, signals a softening in the economy. Historically, it's when the yield or the return on a 10-year bond dips below the yield or the return on a 2-year bond. Typically, shorter investments pay less, longer investments pay more. And so you have what's called an inversion in this graph. You can see the inversions going back to 1980. If you look at the yield curve, a lot of people, again, are saying, how does this impact my business? And this actually gets to the subject today that PCT asked us to touch on, which is retention and how that relates to values. At the end of the day, the yield curve has predicted softening in the economy every recession since 1955. So it is an accurate predictor. The United States is actually on record as having 47 recessions in the history, and most recessions have a lifespan or a life cycle of 6 to 18 months. I believe the average recession lasts about 11 months. So with that said, certainly not trying to scare anybody or scream that perhaps a softening is coming. When you look at the economy today, there's an awful lot of positives that are happening that are things to, while we may have an inverted yield curve, we also have an amazing amount of positive things to celebrate. Job gains remain strong in the economy. Employment rates are extremely strong. Current unemployment is at 3.7%. Economic growth for the U.S. and the GDP remains extremely strong. Actually, the middle class income for the U.S. is up to over $61,000. The stock market is at or near all-time highs. Manufacturing is up. Home prices are up. This especially relates to us and our industry and our business. Gas prices are down. U.S. wages are up, and consumer confidence is being measured at all-time highs. So while we see indications potentially of softening, there's also a very long laundry list of things that indicate the economy is very strong. And we believe that the valuations that we see are incredibly strong. We see great purchase price from buyer to seller, and we still believe that it is absolutely a seller's market. When you look at retention, when you look at the economy and whether the economy is actually going to continue to go full steam ahead and stay strong, or if it softens a little bit, it's really, really interesting to look at how consumers prioritize spending. And there was a Harvard Business Review, a study in 2009 that studied this very thing. It's really, really interesting. As the economy moves, and if there is potentially a softening, people begin to say, is my product or service essential? Is my product or service a treat? Is it an indulgence? Do I really need to purchase this, or do I just want to purchase this? Is the purchase of a good or service postponable? Do I need to do this? Can I wait? Or the last bucket, if you will, is my purchase expendable? When you think about the pest control industry, when you certainly think about the history of the industry, one of the things that you hear about the industry is that it's quote unquote recession proof. I would say that if you study the history of the industry, currently the compounded annual growth of the industry is around 5 or above 5%. So that's a really critical thing to know. It's also critical that even when you go back and look at different recessions, different tough times in the economy, the most amazing thing about the pest control industry is that it continues to grow. And this is a very, very positive thing. I think we're all incredibly fortunate to be in the industry, regardless of our role or position in the industry. It's an absolutely great industry to be in good times or in softer times. So as you think about the economy, if you think about the economy, you definitely want to think about your business. And one of the absolute core things that owners should be focused on in our space is retention. So when you think about retention, I'm going to challenge everybody to also think about the level of loyalty of your customer base. And we'll get into that. So when you think about retention, the greatest opportunity to really increase your profitability is to drive and work really, really hard at retention your entire team, from technicians to salespeople. Are they selling the services right? Are the technicians doing the service correctly? Retention touches everybody in the organization, whether you're in acquisitions, whether you're in integration, whether you're in finance, HR, it touches everybody. So the advantage to loyalty is that if there is a softening of the economy, the more loyal the customer, the higher your retention will continue to stay. So referrals actually is also a key part of that, and we'll get into that as well as we go through this. So as we focus on the agenda today, because I'm going to shift away from the economy and the news and dig more into retention and loyalty as it pertains to value if and when you think about selling your business. So when you think about loyalty, you should also think about value. The more loyal your customer base is, the longer that it retains, the higher the value of your business. So it's really a key thing. So we're going to jump into what it actually is. We're going to go to what the numbers look like for the industry, quantifying your opportunities, calculating retention itself, and then looking at some reasons that customers leave and potentially some retention strategies to help customers stay. All these things increase the value of your business when you prepare or consider selling it. So what is retention? And here is where I want to get into loyalty versus retention itself. When we look at retention, we look at it as a metric. So at the end of the day, we're measuring how many people are staying with the company, and you can skin this a bunch of different ways, right? You can peel that onion based on the service line. How many are staying in residential pest versus commercial versus lawn, tree, shrub versus termite versus baiting versus liquid, and so on and so on and so on. You can even look at retention by route if you have a branch that's having retention issues. So you really want to understand where those customers come and where they're leaving, and then begin to understand why. Loyalty is not a metric. Loyalty is actually a behavior. As you look at customer loyalty, this is the result of consistent positive experiences with your customer. So if you think about that, that starts with the sale, but it also is with every service, with every phone call, with every bill that's sent or paid. Every time that there's an interaction between the customer and the company, there's an experience there that's either positive or negative. Those experiences drive the loyalty, and that loyalty drives that retention metric. So I wanted to break it down a little bit further. When you think about loyalty, one of the funniest things to think about is everybody on the phone can probably think of friends and family, and they either drink Coke or they drink Pepsi, but they usually don't drink both. So, when you go to order a beverage, even the waiters or waitresses will say Coke or Pepsi, and you get an immediate response. And if you don't have the one they want, they're moving on to water or iced tea or something else. That's the loyalty to the brand. You think Ford and Chevy. I had a Ford, and I remember being at a gas station, and I remember a guy in the Chevy at the pump next to me said, "Hey, do you know what Ford stands for?" And I said, "No." And he said, "It stands for flip it over and read the directions." People that drive Chevys aren't driving Fords, and vice versa. If you play that loyalty and that retention to our industry, you could be looking at Orkin, Terminex, Rentokil. Think of our sponsors today, the biggest players in our industry, the Arrows, the Massey's. When people move around, whether they're in the Southeast or they're moving across the country, if they're loyal to that brand, when they move, if they went from Florida to Texas and they're with any of our sponsors or anybody else, they're probably calling that company right back because of that loyalty and that retention. These concepts are actually really, really, really critical to driving the business. And one of the more interesting concepts to me is that as critical as retention is, and we talk about it and we think about it and we try to act on it, it's actually not a number that's on our P&L. However, that said, it certainly has a massive influence on the P&L. So if your retention is high, you can be rest assured that your profit probably follows, and your profit is high as well. When buyers or clients or customers' loyalty is high, the retention is high, the attrition is low, and your P&L probably looks really, really good. So when we talk about retention, when we talk about loyalty, we say, what is the difference? You think about the value of the customer base. Retained customers that retain and stay with you are loyal. They'll buy more services. The more services that they buy, the longer that we know that they stay. When customers only have one service, it's easier for them to opt out of the service with your company. So the more services that they have, you're driving loyalty and retention. If retention goes up, your costs typically go down and your profits go up. The cost of sale, the initial service, these are all things that are actually more expensive than to deliver a simple retention or new service or reservice to a retained customer. So these concepts are really, really critical to driving the profit of the business. When you when you think about retention as well, as you go to sell your business, you have meetings with buyers, you prepare the company. Once you get to either the letter of intent or you get to due diligence, I will promise you that every buyer is going to study your retention by service line, by route. So retention is a critical factor, not only day in and day out as you run your business, it's also a very, very critical factor when you go to sell the business. So as you look at increases in customer retention, there's a concept called the loyalty effect. This is effectively it's defined as finding and keeping good customers and employees and supportive investors that help you generate, as an enterprise, as an entire company, it helps you generate superior results. So the loyalty effect will help you drive that P&L. And again, as you consider selling, most buyers are going to look at least 3 years, as much as 5 years of historical financials. And even though the retention is not necessarily on the financials, on the P&L, the results of the retention will be there. So it's a very important thing to consider. So here's a quote from Mark Cuban, and I really love to study quotes. I love to hear what these really uber successful people have to say and what they think. I think everybody probably knows Mark Cuban owns the Dallas Mavericks. He's on the TV show The Shark, and he is a very successful businessman and billionaire. And he says it's much easier to be nice, to be respectful, to put yourself in your customer's shoes and try to understand how you might help them before they ask for help than it is to try to mend a broken customer relationship. And that really gets to retention. When a customer speaks to somebody at your company and it's through the phone, when they speak to a salesperson, when they speak to a technician, when they speak to a supervisor or a manager, is there a script or is there a process in place where you're always saying the appropriate things? Is there anything else I can help you with? Are you happy? Have we solved any issues that you have? Is there a process in place to maintain these relationships, just to be nice, to be respectful, and to try to be in front of the curve, to try to solve the problems on the front end, and just assure that that customer is, in fact, a very happy customer? When you look at the retention rates in our industry, and this is a very important thing, they're different based on the service line, and I'm sure most of the folks on the phone are aware of this. But the higher the retention rates, the higher the value is when you sell your business. Bundled services actually increase the retention rates, and technology is a huge piece of this as well. Technology, easy pay, emails, how do you communicate with the customer? Can you do text, tablets, emails? Is there a customer portal, and so on? So all these things play into retention. When you look at retention at the pest control, inside the pest control industry, residential pest, you're really looking for about a 1.25% attrition per month, which effectively you're looking for a range in residential pest retention of 82 to 87%. The higher the better, but certainly you don't want to go lower than the 82 if you can manage that. Commercial pest, you're looking for greater than 94%, 0.5% a month in commercial pest control attrition. This is a critical thing. Commercial pest control is very highly valued because of the retention that it has. These are much slower sales. They take longer to close. They're usually on longer contracts, so they're harder to lose, but you still have to deliver a great service, and you really want to target that 94%. termite, I'm going to say termite 90% or better. And there again, are you on a baiting system? Are you on Centricon? Are you using Termidor? Are you using Premise? We know that baiting systems typically renew higher than liquids, but what kind of contract do you have? What are the terms? How long is it? And again, you know, are you delivering the right service and making sure that the customer understands what they own? Lawn and ornamental, we're going to say 2% attrition per month, 70 to 76% retention rates, not below 70. This is another critical number. A lot of people, a lot of buyers actually outside of certain states, Florida being one of them, will not necessarily acquire lawn, tree, shrub work. And that's because of this number. The retention is lower. The trucks are extremely expensive. Most completed lawn trucks with diesels and big rigs can be, you know, $70,000 to $80,000, when pest control trucks can be in the $15,000 range. The chemical or the cost of goods on lawn and ornamental can be certainly north of 10%, in the range of 10 to 15%, where pest control chemical costs can be certainly less than 5%. So you have a much more expensive service to perform that retains less. So these are factors that certainly play into the value of the business when you go to sell it. Another thing to consider is skips. Skips are not cancels. However, multiple skips, consecutive skips, are certainly an indicator that you may be heading towards a cancel. So managing skips and retention is a critical piece of the retention management process. So these are all really, really critical numbers to try to manage and to try to hit. So let's quantify the opportunity in terms of retention. So this is the 80-20 rule. Effectively, 80% of your future profits come from 20% of the existing customers after 1 year. Your profit of your pest control business almost always comes from the retained recurring customers. And that's what we're trying to demonstrate here. A lot of people lose sight of the value of that retained customer, and they're chasing the sale. And you need to be equally passionate about chasing the retention as well. Another thing to keep in mind is one-time services. They're nice to do when you can do them, but in an acquisition, most one-time services will have little to zero value. Increasing your retention rates by 5% has the same impact on a lot of companies, not all, but a lot of companies, as improving profits by 25%. Why is this? How does it happen? Referrals go up when you have retention going up. Your close rates go up. Your cross sales go up. Marketing is certainly going to go down over time if you can get the retention rates up. The density of the routes should increase. This is an absolute profit driver. And sales related costs go down. So these are all critical factors in driving profit. A 2% increase in retention has a similar effect as decreasing expenses by 10%. This is really interesting. If you have a company with revenue at about $1 million, you have let's say an average service cost of $600, and you have 80% customer retention, that's 1,300 customers. If you bump that retention to 82%, you have 1,040. And so that's a gain of 26 customers at the $600 annual service. That's a pickup of 15,600. If you have cost of goods at 70%, if you have expenses, normalized expenses at 15%, the net of 15%, you cut the expenses by 10% on the 150, that's 15,000. So a lot of people are going to say, let's cut costs, when maybe a more positive approach for the businesses, let's drive retention. Let's have a retention strategy from the cradle to the grave, from the day the business is sold until the customer leaves. So another way to look at the retention is the loyalty of the customer. So a loyal customer can really drive the P&L. The loyalty is driving the retention. If you have an average sale of $700 on one customer, and that customer is with you for 8 years, the lifetime value is 700 times 8 is 5,600. If they refer one customer a year for the 8 years and you close that customer, that is 8 referrals times 5,600, assuming the same price point, is 44,800. So the total value of that lifetime value of that customer is actually their value of 5,600 plus the referred value of 44,800, which is 50,400, which is a 9x multiple on the value of that initial customer. It doesn't always work this way. This is an example, but what it's trying to demonstrate is that when retention is a key focus, it drives value in a lot of other areas, and it does drive the P&L. It does drive the value of your business when you go to sell it. Calculating retention is pretty straightforward. So this should be done by service line and by total retention, but it's the customers at the end of the month minus the customers acquired the current month divided by customers at the start of the month. Pretty straightforward. You do this by service line and by the company. It's a metric that everybody in your entire company should really be passionate about and understand, as it may go through some ups and downs over time. Why do customers leave? So, you know, this is a hot topic, and I would say that as you look at why customers leave, this can be a pretty significant project on its own based on the size of your company. But you want to probably go back and understand what channel brought the customer in, because we know that certain channels actually retain better than others. So as an example, a referred customer in most companies has a higher retention rate than, let's say, a door-to-door customer. If you had a technician that knocked on the doors around the service that he just completed, and he happened to get a door-to-door, but you're also servicing referrals, those referrals tend to be much, I'm going to say, stickier. They stay longer. So not all acquisition channels are created equal. Communication is absolutely key to retention. So you definitely want to work with everybody in the company and making sure that the communication with the customer, regardless of if it's at a sale, if it's over the phone, if it's with a technician, that they know what to say, they need to say the appropriate things at the appropriate time. Communication is absolutely a key. So it's very, very important to know what questions to ask when you're studying retention. So there is a customer life cycle. Each location that you have, each service, each route is going to have different retention. Why do customers leave companies? As a general rule, these numbers are pretty stable. 1% of the time, the customer is just no longer with us. So, you know, that happens. 3% of the time, customers locate. 5% of the time, and this could be perceived as certainly as a controllable, but you know, the customer leaves to go to another service, another company. Maybe they're going to go to Home Depot or Lowe's and try to do it themselves. If that happens, I would advocate that that's probably on us. Have we been able to demonstrate the value of the service to the customer? Do they really know why they should not terminate a pest control service and all the health advantages for them and their family with a pest control service, or why they should definitely not terminate a termite agreement, or why they should keep that rodent service or mosquito service, and on and on and on. So if customers are leaving to do it themselves, if customers are leaving to go to a competitor or challenging about price, I call that a controllable, because maybe we have not communicated appropriately the value of what we do. And you're back to another controllable, right? Are the customers happy? If you're asking the right questions, if you're communicating, you know when those customers are happy and when they're not. So these are all really important things. And then the biggest one of all is that, and this is, again, generally speaking, most of your customers leave, a lot of times they just don't think that we care about them anymore. We lose that personal touch. They become just something that we do, right? Did you get your 20 stops in today? And when you start thinking about the business in those terms and less about the customer themselves and what we deliver and why we deliver it, that's when the customer begins to think we possibly just don't care about them anymore. We're chasing their wallet, we're chasing the pocketbook, we're not really focused on the right things, and then they leave. So, you know, it's very important to understand why they leave. So in terms of improving retention, I love to study Steve Jobs, a very passionate, intense entrepreneur. And one of his quotes was, "Get closer than ever to your customers, so close that you tell them what they need well before they realize it themselves." Back to communicating, back to making sure, hey, summer's right around the corner, spring's around the corner. Can I tell you about our mosquito or lawn tree shrub service? Year round, you know, I noticed that you don't have our pest control, our rodent service. Can I take a minute and explain to you what we do, why we do it, and how it can benefit you and your family? And on and on and on. Be in front of that customer interaction when you can. So basic retention strategies, I would say time is money for everybody, from everybody that's on the phone today on the virtual conference to all of our employees and all the people that help us drive these businesses to the customers themselves. One of the more fundamental things is, are you showing up on time? Are you communicating and educating the customers? Do the customers have the right expectations and knowledge about what we do, when they should see results? Those sorts of knowledge transfers and communication points are really, really critical. Another one that's really big is appearance. And we're saying, is the employee put together? What do the uniforms look like? What do the trucks look like? What if you're not paperless today, what does the paperwork look like? And what do the apps look like that the customers are interfacing with? So these questions really all tie into retention and what the customer sees, what the customer experiences, how loyal they become, how long they stay. And then again, it all ties into the value that you may see the day that you consider selling the business. So communicating and scripting, if you're on the phone today, you own your business, and maybe you do have a retention challenge, maybe just in one service line or in several service lines, communication and scripting is really, really critical. Does your team communicate what they're doing in the field? Is the phone exchange with your customer a positive exchange? How many times did the phone ring? How long were they on hold? And once they did get to talk to somebody, what did that sound like from the customer's point of view? These are all really, really critical things. And if every position that interacts with a customer has a script, you can't script everything, but if you script the things that you're certainly aware of, you're going to get a lot higher loyalty and you're going to get higher retention. So there's a few things that I've always thought, I'm going to call them value adds, they're service enhancements. They're things that we can do for the customer that don't really cost us anything, maybe a couple of minutes, but the customer isn't going to necessarily pay for, but they're going to notice them. And they're going to be value adds, again, building loyalty, building retention, and building value of the company. Little things. Did the technician walk around the house and walk around the hose or over the hose or on the hose? What about just rolling the hose up to the customer? Little things like bringing in trash cans. A lot of companies today sweep the eaves, sweep the porch, bringing in the newspaper if it's at the end of the driveway. If there's anything else, if you're in the house, you notice that they might want to change the light bulb. If they've got it sitting on the counter, offer to change the light bulb. Whatever you can do to add the value, the little things matter. People do care about the value. They do care about these little nuggets are things that the customer says, wow, this company cares about me, and they're doing the little extras, if you will. More strategies, again, time targets on everything. How long are you there? It's okay to spend extra time if the customer is unsure about the service or having service issues. How long are you on the phone? Making sure that as much as you can measure in the business is measured, again, to build that loyalty and that retention. How long are the service windows? Are the service windows realistic? Or are the technicians scrambling so hard when the customer sees the service, they're thinking, I can't believe I'm paying for that. He was only here for 5 minutes. He was only here for 10 minutes. The customers do notice these things. So, you know, it's really important also, if there are service issues, if there's communication issues, if there's any issue at all with service sales or renewals, own your mistakes and apologize. Customers in this industry want to be loyal and they want to stay with us. And if we say, we're sorry, we're running a few minutes late, or whatever it is that happened, own it, fix it, and do your best to move on. So there's a whole lot of number ones on here, and I suspect the list could be longer than it already is. But I'm going to say that there's no magic bullet to retention. You must listen to the customers, find out what they need, find out what they want, and deliver it to the best of your ability. Do you have a retention team that is in front of the customer on a regular basis, that when customers cancel, they call and they find out why and see if there's a way to resolve it and get them back before they've been gone too long? How do you communicate with the customer beyond the service with emails, quality calls, text messages, and so on? Do you have service satisfaction surveys, service satisfaction calls? Are you solving their issues before you try to cross-sell them? Does the customer actually just come away saying that my company is responsive, they do a great job, I know they care about me, they communicate really, really well? If these are the feelings and the emotions that the customer has, you're building the loyalty, you're building the retention, and ultimately you're building your value as well. So when you look at next level strategies, do you have an onboarding program? Is there an internal representative that calls the customer and walks them through the service, the expectation, how to communicate with the customer, the billing, just the onboarding in general? Onboarding is the old, you never get a second chance to make a first impression. Onboarding is key. And it's not just about closing the sale, it's beyond that. And if you go beyond that, your retention will be amplified. It'll go up. Customer feedback loops. How do they communicate with you? Do they know how to communicate with you? Are there loyalty programs in place? Is there cause marketing? Cause marketing is one of my personal favorites. Do you donate? Or, for example, I know a company that does a mosquito service, and they actually donate. There's mosquito soap that they donate. They donate mosquito nets to problem areas around the world that have mosquito problems. I certainly know of companies that have treated homeless shelters. When I owned my pest control company in Orlando, we treated a few homeless shelters at no charge, just to help people. And those things mean value. They have value to your customers. And customer newsletters. Are you just staying in touch, keeping the awareness with the customers? Customer education. Why should they have mosquitoes? Why should they have rodent service? Why should they have a termite service? Are you trying to get everybody to on your team, in your company? This may sound a little bit corny, but are you trying to surprise the customers, delight the customers? Back to what I previously said, maybe bringing in that newspaper, bringing up the trash can, rolling up the hose, the way that the company uses technology. There's lots of little nuggets out there that surprise customers and, again, build the loyalty and the retention. So something as simple as just making sure that everybody, every time they interact with the customer, says thank you at the end of that interaction. Manners are not out the window these days. Manners still matter. So, again, retention is a metric. Loyalty is a behavior. And if you can drive the loyalty and drive the retention, you're ultimately driving the value of the company. Know your cancellation rates. Understand why customers are skipping. Try to communicate clearly with your customers. Every person in your organization that interacts, make sure they have scripts and understand what they should and shouldn't say. Training is certainly key to retention. And then last but not least, I'll leave you with Sir Richard Branson. The key is to set realistic customer expectations, and then not just to meet them, but to exceed them, preferably in unexpected and helpful ways. And that sort of mindset, that sort of thought process is ultimately what drives loyalty, and again, impacts the retention and the value of the company that you own. And with that, I'll say thank you. Again, I want to say thank you to everybody on the phone today. Thank you again to GIE and PCT and Dan and Brad and Anna and the entire team there, and all the sponsors. Again, Arrow, Massey, Rollins, Terminex, and Rentokil. Thank you, everybody, for your time.
Thanks, Kemp. Great presentation. Certainly enjoyed some of your insights and your perspective on the economy in coming years. Interesting stuff. Hey, we did get a few questions that we'll go through real quick. And again, if we don't have time to get to the questions, send them to us, or we're collecting them, and we'll get you connected with Kemp here. First question we had, Kemp, was what are typical costs of goods sold for pest control firms in the $2 to $5 million annual revenue range? For instance, labor, chemical costs, fleet expense.
Well, I would say that cost of goods is typically pretty stable across our industry. Some of it is dictated on what kind of services that you're offering. As I mentioned, for example, lawn trucks are significantly more than pest control trucks. Fleet is a part of cost of goods. Lawn, tree, shrub, chemical or products is certainly more expensive than standard pest control products. Again, chemical inventory is cost of goods. I would say that some basic targets, again, it's a great question. but every company is going to be a little bit different, and certainly the service lines drive the answer to the question. But I would say 50% labor, 10% fleet, and the last one that's got a range to it, I would say, depending on the services that you offer and how much of those services that you offer, your chemical cost is probably going to come in somewhere between let's say 5 and 14 or 15%. So you might want to aim for a 10 as a number, but those are usually the cost of good metrics that we typically see.
Kim, he had just a real quick follow-up point of clarification. He was kind of looking for the percentage of COGS to revenue.
70%. If I understand the question correctly.
I believe so. Okay. So Kemp, and he did respond back, yes, that is what he was looking for. Okay. All right. So Kemp, one last question for you. Again, we're just a little bit over on time, so we'll ask you one more question here before we let you go. And kind of an interesting one, I think. The comment was that they benchmarked customer retention rates versus their local competitors as well as the industry average. Which do you think is the more important benchmark, or are they both?
Wow, that's a great one. I think my answer to that would probably be both. You definitely need to be relevant in your market. So the market numbers are critical. If they're really good numbers, that's a great thing to know. I would say most companies don't know that. At the same time, and this especially goes to when you're considering selling, your retention numbers need to be in line with industry standards. So that's a fantastic question, and I think my answer, Brad, is both.
Yeah, and just if I could give PCT a little plug here, the question here had to do with benchmarking your business. We actually did a study partnership with NPMA. I believe it was January 2015, if memory serves correct. So that kind of might answer your question there about the industry average as far as retention. There might be some insights into that in that report. So, all right. Hey, Kemp, thanks again for a terrific presentation.
Thank you, guys.
Okay, we're going to move on to the next part of our conference.